Welcome to Refugee Radio.
Welcome to Refugee Radio. In this program, we're going to be looking at the question of Albania. Albania is a former communist country in the Balkan corner of southeast Europe. It borders Kosovo to the north and Greece to the south. Albania has been the subject of a recent panic in the media about immigration and criminality, which has led to a lot of stigmatizing and a lot of misunderstanding. Migration from Albania peaked in 2022 when Albanians made up 16% of all asylum claims in the UK. And this was an unexpected rise, more than 3 times higher than the year before. Albanians also accounted for a third of all people on the small boats, in inverted commas, crossing the channel. Earlier this year, I spoke to one of the members of the Refugee Radio team with personal experience of these issues, and I asked them, why Albania?
It comes down to many factors like culture, obviously, being a poor country as well adds up to it, I think it's the fact that Albania until 90s was like a closed country as well, because we just got out of communism just after that. I think that adds to it as well, and then obviously was the civil war in the 90s, which kind of pushed the idea of running out of there, because of course everybody's life at the time was in danger. Anyone could have a gun and anything like that. So I think if we go back and we look on that, that's how it started. But now, of course, it becomes a factor of many reasons, like traditionally it's like families and like, for example, specifically with men aged 20 to 30, it's like the society pressure, family pressure, this like self-pressure as well, and then growing up on trauma, like, you gotta do something with your life, you have to be somebody, and all these elements then make people, go to that point when like they try anything they can just to see if they can get out of this situation and, feel like I'm worth it, I'm doing something with my life and trying to make themselves proud and families proud. And I think it's a literally mixture of all these elements together, I think. That's the thing, when you are in a certain place in life, when you feel like you don't have no other options, you feel like the only way of making a life for yourself, it's running away from there, then you do whatever you can without thinking about consequences or what that can cause along down the way. No one would think that. Like literally, when you are to a point when like you have no self-worth, you have everybody telling you that like, you're doing nothing for yourself, you are no one, the family pressure, the society pressure, the childhood trauma. For a 20 years old person, imagine the way of that. It causes such an amount of darkness. It's like it's kind of impossible to see, really. And it's very easy to get lied to. And if you hear a story that a friend of a friend of a friend can find you an option to migrate to England, for example, of course you'll take it immediately without thinking that that can even make your life even worse than it actually is, and ending up in God knows how much debt and not even being able to pay it back and everything else. But at that point, no one is gonna think about it. You think, oh my God, I have a chance to run away, so you just take it. Not everyone is aware of what being trafficked is. Just because somebody, right, can make you a story and make you believe certain things, right, and you think you're making a decision that is your decision actually you're just being manipulated and you're not even aware about it. But of course, like, I don't know how, when it comes to the, the protests, the asylum protests, and how much they do actually look deep into that, because yeah, exactly, that absolutely can happen so many times. And obviously we're talking about vulnerable people who are already very vulnerable because of their mental health, because of the society pressures, because of whatever that is that's going on in their lives, and they are making that decision of going from a country to another. That's a big, massive step. And obviously you are much likely to be manipulated and lied to based on a story, and you think, okay, you're not being trafficked because you choose to, but actually you were just manipulated.
Albania suffered widespread civil unrest in 1997. The government itself had been running a criminal pyramid scheme to con people out of $1.2 billion of their money, and when this scheme collapsed, the government also collapsed. During the violence, weapon depots and army bases were looted, leading to widespread gun ownership. It's estimated that every male from the age of 10 upwards had at least one firearm and ample ammunition. And this laid some of the foundations for the issues ongoing today.
I was 5 when we moved from North Albania to the capital city, and literally in 97, like, everybody who traveled from North Albania, or each side really, but you did long journeys travel, people would come on the mountains with gun and stop every bus or every kind of public transport really, and check everybody and take like gold or money or whatever anybody possessed with them that was valuable possessions. People will take it from you, and like, you had no option just to give it away if you wanted your life to be, saved. And I remember I was a kid, like 5 years old, asking my mom, are these men gonna kill us and things like that. So I mean, imagine the level of trauma in that. Of course, like, when a person sees that, you try to escape from that, and obviously, like, when it starts back in the day like this, and back in the 90s, 100%, this is the pyramid scheme. This was such a, like, it was crazy because, yeah, literally everybody lost money. And then, of course, that made it such a, like, it really became tragic, and it became kind of scary, really scary times, because, yeah, like I said, anyone could go, like, on this army depot, right? And you could go get guns. And, like, in the 90s, for sure, everybody, literally everybody had guns. Hopefully, I think now has changed. It's not the same, of course, but back in the day it was literally like that. You could walk around the street and you could see anybody with a gun, and like, imagine, how crazy that is, because obviously when everybody gets a gun like this, no one is thinking logically like, I might harm somebody or I might harm myself. Sometimes it turns, weirdly enough, it turns even like a game unconsciously, and people think they're playing. Everybody could shoot. Literally, I know stories of people being shot accidentally and not knowing even where it came from. Literally, just walking on the street and ending up being shot. So it was literally like early 90s till kind of mid 2000. It was this kind of craziness. It was just next door, obviously, like in the 90s, 99, when the Kosovo War was going on as well. So I think, yeah, it's all of them together like this.
Professor Stephanie Schwandner-Sievers is the Professor of Applied Anthropology at Bournemouth University and has provided expert country of origin advice for the asylum courts in the UK. She has interviewed Albanian perps in high-security prisons and has provided expert advice for Scotland Yard and other police forces. She describes her work with the police as a form of cultural translator.
So in 1999, there was the Kosovo War, and there was a whole surge in refugees from Kosovo afterwards. And of course, also several Albanians from Albania latched onto it, claiming they were Kosovans because they desperately needed to come to the UK. So we had these bogus claims and we had real claims from Kosovo, but it was the Kosovo War, the sort of the war, the oppression and violence, state violence had happened much longer already. There were refugees earlier, but there was this huge surge after this outright war, 98, 99, and people coming. And some of the people I dealt with in the sense of being asked to write a background report on their case, whether they had a genuine refugee claim, were women or people outside the gender binary, so LGBTQ plus people who fled here. For me, the major issue is really about the ways in which Albanians at large are stereotyped. So when I get called upon to explain Albanian culture in court, I get very edgy, and I need to sort of disentangle how, as anthropologists, we actually deal with the concept of culture as something which is not just fixed in time and good for explaining things that have happened, but something that's very fluid and negotiated and changing, and has a lot to do with individuals, with families, with particular regions. So, the whole idea of a ethno-national culture is really outdated. You might have seen the bad press that Albanians have had over years. And in sociology and anthropology, we talk about moral panics, not just around immigrants. Here's a double whopper, which is also about being Albanian. So there are these culturalist assumptions that they are inherently violent and criminal, which is just totally unfair, of course. But of course, many young Albanians have ended up, young or old Albanians, on criminal pathways for reasons that are not reasons to do with their culture. It's not that culture is something that have you like a chip in your head that determines your behavior. But this is how it often is used as an explanation, and that makes it really problematic. And when we're in the realm of stereotyping. One very important metaphor that comes up always is the term kanun. And kanun is actually an Arab or Ottoman term translated. The Arab Ottoman word means actually rule, and it's also come via the canon in Greek is the same thing. So this is used and has also got into the Albanian language as depicting ways in which people self-regulate and the rules that they claim to adhere to on a local level outside state law. So kanun has been translated as the local customary law, but in scholarly debates, even what customary law even is highly debated because it's so wobbly. So, and if you then look more closely at how Albanians before this term kanun became so consolidated in the rhetoric and discourses about Albanians, and even within and among Albanians, as something that depicts their own culture. So it also has sort of like sometimes positive identity connotations. If you look at how they speak themselves about it or used to speak about it, they would use all sorts of terms like customs or ways of doing things or traditions, etc., etc. And then you have a period during which ethnographers or missionaries, and most prominently there is somebody called Gjechovi, Stefan Gjechovi. He collected oral history and sayings and put them all together, but he put them into paragraph form. And that then became this printed version that everybody now uses and waves at each other and says, this is the Albanian customary law. But this was collected more than 100 years ago. It's just a glimpse. We don't know that much about the context of how he collected this information. He probably had one main person to talk to. He have currently a PhD student who works very closely on wider influences on how he came to actually collect what he collected and represent it in the way he did. The interesting thing is that this kanun, as this printed book that Gjechovi produced, has got this huge life of its own. I was working, say, with Metropolitan Police. They came in a homicide case and they waved that big red book. It's now printed. There's a print, an American, English, Albanian double-sided thing since the 1980s out there. And he waved that at me, this big red book, and said, now I understand the Albanians, you just go to paragraph such and such, and this is why they do what they do. And that's not how reality works. Reality works in very many different ways. So we have to always be aware of how culture might implicitly influence people, in the sense of that you grow up in a particular social context where certain things are taken for granted and shared, what is right or wrong. And so in this sense, culture matters. But then culture becomes also something people talk about, and it becomes a really important resource to refer to justify whatever you do. And because Kanun became such an emblematic symbol of what it is to be an Albanian, sort of from the outside or also inside to certain stakeholders. It's become this really valuable, important reference point for people to explain anything, really. And it seems to offer these easy explanations. And yes, of course, there's a kernel of truth in many of its sayings because they were collected locally, probably, and because yeah, they are a glimpse at a particular time, at a particular space into how the culture might have operated there. But you can't just use it. It just simplifies it, just using it as an explanation per se without contextualizing whatever you're facing in the particular time and space of its occurrence.
Albania has been identified as a source country for people subject to trafficking, including forced prostitution and slave labour. A UK Parliament report recently stated that there are at least 100,000 victims of modern-day slavery and human trafficking in the UK. Most of these are men, but female victims are disproportionately impacted by sexual exploitation. Unfortunately, recent attempts to clamp down on illegal migration has had the impact of making it harder for victims of trafficking to get protection from the government.
It's a small country, it's like, for example, here, right, Brighton. Obviously, people gonna end up knowing each other. Obviously, they're in a small country. Somehow, of course, they're gonna know your family. Of course, in a way or another, even in a very far away down the road, somehow they're gonna find out who you are or who your family is. And especially if you owe money to them, they will do the search and the research to find out how to get that money back. So they're not gonna really care, So it's, as sad as it is, unfortunately, of course this is going to happen. And obviously no one thinks about it, and because I guarantee to you, if people would think about it, they wouldn't take that risk. If somebody end up in that amount of debt, right, and they come over here, of course they will end up doing anything they can to pay that debt back, right? Of course you're gonna end up doing illegal jobs, because what other option do you have? If you are taken and thrown back to where you came from, you'll never be able to pay the money back. So that either you're gonna end up dead, or the consequences are gonna end up being on your family, because that can happen as well. Because if somebody gave you that much money, of course they do it with intention that in a way or another they're gonna get it back from you. I don't think anyone just give you 20k and say it's fine, if you can pay it back to me, pay it. If you cannot, it's okay. I don't think so. So obviously that's gonna have insane consequences. If the first people that they traveled, for example, right, they are for a certain area, they're gonna be the first one to sort of tell stories or invite people back or whatnot. So this is how it's going to start, and then it's going to sort of spread out, right? So because when for example, in the 90s, the whole craziness started, of course, the migration started from the north, because that was the poorest side of the country. Prior to that, for example, even if you go back in communism, right, people traveled, but that was the south, because they could travel from the sea. So they were the ones that they go in United States and other countries. So that was different type of migration. And then after 90s, because of the war, was the north side of the country. So obviously, and that is sort of the poorest country and the poorest part of the country, and the part of the people that obviously they hadn't even traveled much, they haven't experienced as much. So of course that's gonna make them likely and more vulnerable to become prey of a desire for a better life, or thinking you're gonna make it going somewhere else, or just really making a life for yourself. Because if you live in mountains in the middle of nowhere, you don't really have much of a life, so in that sense you're gonna have this dream, like an illusion, and thinking, okay, let me try it, without knowing what are you even trying, or what you put in yourself into, and anything like that. Especially young boys or young men, whatever, from age 20 to 30, of course they are much more pressured. You have to be, you're the man of the house, you know what I mean? That kind of idea. And it's you have to be the one that, you're gonna provide, and you have to be the one that, the pressure on them is so high that, sometimes I don't think they see it or realize it, and then they put themselves in certain consequences that, sometimes unfortunately can even be devastating. Like, I've heard stories of people when, that they die trying to cross the border to come over here, and for what? Just trying to, like, because it's really sad to me, the fact that no one has this, like, why don't you study or find something that you love doing and make a life for yourself through that? Obviously, the bad examples are the first one, that obviously, because you think that's the easy way, right? So, but obviously the easy way always have consequences. There is no easy way into going illegally in another country when you have no right to even be there, to find any kind of job, to make any kind of money. Then obviously automatically you're gonna end up doing jobs that they are illegal. Like, what else? You know what I mean? It's not like you have much of a choice in that sense. It's just crazy, really.
So like sex work and drugs work,
anything, like, really. In terms of surviving, when you are in a place in life and you basically are on the street, and you are in that literally can have consequences not just on you but in your family, what else can you do? You're gonna end up doing anything you can just to make that money and pay that debt back, and at least just release yourself from that, because that's the thing. Because of course that's gonna cause, even more mental health consequences, but I think that's another deeper topic to go into and things like that. But this is definitely one of, many, 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 many reasons. Yeah.
So patriarchal structures are extremely important. Family is extremely important across the Albanian societies. I mean, family and patriarchy also matters in the UK, in UK society. So maybe it's just a matter of degree. But we have certain cultural facts that we can talk about, such as that there is a rule that normally and traditionally, the woman would marry into the husband's house. We call that, so the perfect social anthropological term is post-marital, very local forms of residence. So, after marriage, the woman moves into the husband's house, and she is the one, because social care and security is not what it is, how we know it in the UK. So the social care would be given by the Nusia, the young woman, the woman who marries into the house, to the elder parents. Yes, she has a particular situation. Of course, she has to grow into this household. She becomes, she's respected normally from the beginning, but she has to prove also, that she can bear sons. So that's a very patriarchal, traditional panorama within which particular power structures work between generations and in families and between families. And that's been described widely and vastly in the literature, and I've seen it in my ethnographic fieldwork. It's of course also changing, and there's new local forms of residence, so that just the couple moves together, but it has a lot to do with class, it has a lot to do with regions, and it has a lot to do also with economic standing and security. So the family, in the sense, is really the nexus, the core of guaranteeing security. And all of this has an impact on how on the position, the role of women, or if you fall outside the norm of heteronormative familism. So that is the norm of that you have a man and a woman, and within the wider family reproducing, having kids, and so the family goes on here through the patrilineage, which is really classic patriarchy in the traditional sense. So the Albanians culturally have been described of one representing one of the last examples of pure classic patriarchy in Europe. Again, also this is changing, but of course the features are very prominent, particularly while poverty persists for for a wide and large group of the population. So that means the relations within a family are really interesting. And now I've just described to you a cultural structure that actually matters and that's perpetuated, and that we could talk about, and that is important to who understand why and how people operate, including in the transnational sense, who helps them to come, what networks do you have, where do you go for security, etc., etc. But now comes the bit where I tell you how the agency, so what people decide themselves, the choices they take, the individualist aspirations matter within all of that. And so two examples for contrast. So I was dealing with these cases and writing background reports for women who had fled, who had been raped during the war in Kosovo. So a horrible situation. Of course, not only in such a traditional context, anywhere there is a huge issue of shame when it comes to rape on a personal as well as on a family level. So many respects. It's really difficult and horrible. Now it's war rape, so there is a particular symbolic message part of this between the ethnic groups and from one group of men to the other, showing them you can't even protect your women, which is like one of the pillars of patriarchy. So I was dealing with one woman who were her Viera, the mother-in-law, so the husband's father, had left. So the men were all gone, disappeared in the mountains. But there was war rape, and it was done in front of the remaining people in the house. And so the woman was left in the house to die after the rape. So it was set on fire, but she managed to escape and she managed to come to the UK. So here you have an example where, yeah, we don't know what the motives were. And it's very easy to say, this is culture, this woman needed to be eradicated, her purity was impacted, whatnot. Is it really? Because the other case was that the same situation happened, but mother-in-law and daughter-in-law agreed implicitly, explicitly to keep that silent. They would never speak about it. So they kept that even silent before the men. So there was a choice to be made. And even though none of them was, even the second one is about dependency and what do you do, and leaves the daughter-in-law at the mercy of the mother-in-law. But it's just for contrast really important to see that individuals make choices, so culture does not explain everything. And another example is a member of the LGBTQ plus community. He came from Kosovo, and again, this heteronormativity and patriarchalism is really hard if you are outside the center of the cool avant-garde in Pristina, where there you can even find a cafe and an NGO, and even though they also have to be careful and operate carefully, there is a possibility to be gay and live your life. It's really different the moment you go a little bit outside these more privileged circles. And they felt that they had to flee in order to live their lives here. They also, I just found a quote in one of my earlier writings about these differences and these cases. So there was this Kosovo Albanian respondent who I interviewed in the UK and had fled here as a LGBTQ plus person. And he says, in Kosovo, murder still goes as legitimate in certain contexts, and being homosexual goes as criminal. So he himself is an example that not everybody adheres to that. So you have in the country or in particular contexts this recourse to tradition to exclude or include certain people. So it has a huge impact, the discourse, the way you talk about it, on how you deal with people, how you treat them, and what position they have in society. But it's not a given. It's because people choose to refer to Kanun or to refer to patriarchy and particular norms in order to reproduce those permanently. And of course, people are as varied there as they are here, and there are already spaces and there's massive modernization happening where it's perfectly possible to be different and where it even becomes cool. So yes, society is ever and always in flux, and so is culture. Yeah, I just to finish my examples, I had examples of husbands leaving their war-raped woman behind and sort of throwing her out of the family, and then you have others who fled exactly with their wife in order to maintain that relationship against, for example, their family's will. So again, the spectrum of possibilities is very wide. But if you just address issues because the Albanian as with your stereotypical lens of Albanian culture, you will definitely not see what the real reasons are. And one of my colleagues, Jade Lavelle in particular, she worked through music elicitation with former offenders, Albanian former offenders in the community and in prison, sort of rehabilitation cases in the community and in prison in Albania. And she found out so much about the vulnerability of these young men and the stories they told, mostly through hip hop, but not only through hip hop, about their upbringing and their fears, their hopes. And a lot of the cases, it had a lot to do with adverse childhood experiences. And again, this is something which we also found in our work with hip hop lyrics, beats and sound creation, beats and lyrics creation, which was led by my colleague Mark Berry. And we had texts where we found young men who had been returned with their family against their will and against the family's will from any really European nation because of, failed asylum claims or procedural errors, so that got just, sent back. And they are sent back after having, years and years spent in this case, it was a Swedish school, had their Swedish friends taken from them, were now back in a language that they had never learned to write just knew from their family, didn't have friends. And then this young kid is so lonely and finds substitute support in street life in these in these communities. And we also found that a lot of these kids who were really at highest risk had domestic violence issues, bullying issues, or families that had left on migration for poverty reasons and they were left behind or partly left behind. So it was all adverse conditions in which vulnerability to criminal exploitation rose massively. And that's not rocket science. We know that from any context across the world, including in the UK. But interestingly, we found a lot of these individual stories through working with them through hip hop. And we didn't only work through hip hop, we also worked through soundscape composition, which is a bit more sensitive perhaps to vulnerability when you have people who are not strong in textual expression and didn't feel comfortable with it. It was also our safeguard against imposing hip hop. So people chose, they opted into working with us on this co-research, and either through hip hop or through soundscape composition. So we have a wealth of material and stories of these young people experiences. And I'm strongly convinced that the solution to these issues where illegal immigration happens and risk on being on boats and drown and then getting into, I don't know, cannabis houses, etc., for young Albanians, that this is best dealt with at source by supporting these young people and building alternative opportunities and having safeguarding principles in place. So this project we worked on was working exactly on that. There's also similar projects, but there's also a lot that can still be done in Albania, including by the Albanians themselves and the Albanian state as well. I think the media have a huge influence. You can find again and again depictions of Albanians as particular, the villain in so many films as criminal. And then you have also, of course, people who exploit that on the Albanian side, exactly those who are the criminals, because it's just so handy having this image and it gives you such an advantage in terms of justifying what you're doing and actually also instilling a sense of threat or respect in your opponents. So I think for criminals comes in really handy. And in fact, this is a phenomenon we've observed and described, and not just I alone, how particular people involved in making money at the expense of others on a massive scale, how they've used Qanun, or also to threaten or to defend their turf. Qanun they used as a reference, and it really helped their reputation as being particular violent. And Kanun is not just Kanun, there are elements to it which are also known in popular culture. So particularly best known is the concept of Besa. And Besa has sometimes been explained in terms of Omerta, so the Italian mafia code, as a code of silence. And Besa, I did my MA on it. So all my research in the early 1990s in Albania, in the north of Albania, was about the function meaning of Besa in the post-communist, immediate post-communist period. So was it still there? Was it real? Did it matter? And it is really an interesting metaphor and trope that people refer to in order to explain who they are. And it's not all bad. It's not all about, not at all. It's not all about a criminal code of silence. It is, if you look at it etymologically, it's related to the notion of the oath. And if you look at it in more sociological or social anthropological in terms of its functions, it is really the loyalty, trustworthiness, the binding of relationships that are not necessarily secured because a state rule of law is not there to guarantee contracts. So that applies in marriage. So you would have a relationship with your in-laws, your wife's relatives, or or your daughter or sister's fine relatives, so the ones you married into, secure to this idea of Besa. This is you stand in with all the loyalty and trustworthiness you have because you've become sort of family. And there is myth and mythology around the concept of Besa, how beyond death you are loyal to your brother and things like this. So it's a powerful concept, and it is an concept that is referred to and operated. But equally, I had people sort of critically saying to me, like almost, ironically, sarcastically saying, we talk so much about Besa, this is because we don't have it. So again, it's this one has to pay attention as a social anthropologist in particular to what people say and what they do. And also what the effect is of what they say on what they do. And I think these are really interesting lines of investigation and digging into. So if people talk a lot about Kanun, if people talk a lot about Besa, my anthropological question is why? So I'm not saying it's wrong or not wrong. I don't answer whether it existed or didn't exist in times immemorial. It becomes really important sort of also to use for arguments in terms of national, ethno-national continuity, and there's a lot of romanticism about it as well. But for me, the whole concept of myth is really about its function. So why do people need to emphasize these terms and that this is who they are? And how does that then interplay with these external stereotypes about the Albanians? And how does that serve criminals in, justifying what they do? And I just found it so powerful. And what also is so interesting is how these external stereotypes actually get into complicity with, I called it something like implicit alliance in my writing, with these internal constructions and assumptions as well. But it's maybe cruel what we do as anthropologists. We really strip back what people say to just not taking it as a given and just trying to understand why people talk about this like that. And perhaps it's also, being a German with a dreadful German history we have, and that we have to deal with and take responsibility for, where you become a social constructivist. We call that like almost by default in order to try to understand and not start from the assumption that every individual just by merit of their birth is part of this unquestionable culture. We think about culture as being made, and there is agency within that. So you have always a differentiation, or you always aim to differentiate people. So, not all Albanians think Kanun is a great thing. Not all Serbs think it's a great thing for certain groups having intruded Kosovo and committed horrendous crimes, etc. And the same, I guess, tells you something about my own background and motives. I need to deal with German history and family history without necessarily confusing, that mass murder makes me as an individual a murderer by default.
You may have heard in the tabloids about the Albanian gangs such as the Hellbanians, who, according to one headline, post pictures of guns and cash on their Instagram page. One question is how images like these contribute to encouraging people to leave their homes and travel to Europe, or whether it is not that simple.
When lots of people started traveling to, and is this closed families, right? That obviously cousins invite cousins and friends invite friends, or they don't, even if they don't invite, you tell stories and you are this person went there and they made money, or even if they didn't, because obviously going on holidays from here to there, you have more chance to spend more than when you live there. So that's gonna create the illusion, okay, this person must have made lots of money, let me try it too, without even knowing what and stuff like that. Yeah, because what can you do with that? If you put that on TikTok, you're gonna get more views. So obviously it's one of those that kids nowadays, they would easily use it in this form, and that's the thing, it may not be the case at all, the reality may be completely different, and those prices, for example, or because I don't think, maybe it is, to be honest, but I don't think it's as easy as an ad on TikTok, to find somebody to take you, illegally from one place to another and whatnot, you know what I mean? But, this, it's all it takes, because, that is very easily, to be honest, to get into the head of a person and say, oh, that's very easily, let me try this. I think I can find a way of doing that and borrow this money and then just try. Of course, and obviously, no one would tell, how they doing well, you know what I mean, or how much they had to work, or how hard it was to go to the point of doing well, obviously, because it's this sense of proudness as well. So it's you don't tell the hardship, you just tell that you make it, you see, I'm great, so of course that's gonna create, even a bigger illusion. Somebody managed at that time in the 90s to migrate and move, for example, to UK and made a life for themselves and whatnot, then of course their story seems like a story to follow up to. Okay, I can be somebody like them because they traveled and they made it, so I can probably make it. So I think this is another, one of those reasons that can push or motivate somebody to, migrate and travel and just try to do something better for their lives, I suppose, and get out of the situation, whatever the situation is that they are in. And of course the illusion that comes through social media and whatnot, when you see a beautiful life, you think that might happen for you as well, without knowing the consequences of going in any country illegally when you are not able to work, you're not able to have a house, you're not able to do anything. Obviously, you'll end up somehow finding whatever job you can illegally, first of all, to pay the money back, and second of all, to have a roof over your head, so it's crazy, it really is, to be honest, yeah.
Albanians, what a great topic, but they have gone pretty quiet in recent years. There are though really important hip hop artists that are have been associated with them, Albanian hip hop artists. So I think it was in 2018 or so that I was first approached about the issue of Albanians by police, and there had been some shootout or so, and somebody denied being part of an organized criminal organization, and then had this tattoo, which we then soon knew. And actually, I just did some Instagram research. It was all over Instagram. It was there. There was also interesting mythologies around what that meant. It played on the national emblem, the double-headed eagle of the Albanian flag, as well as depicting sort of two inverted pistols back on back. And really interesting, pretty interesting graphic design, really. And so we had this tattoo, and then you could find that also in gold necklaces, etc., etc. And yes, of course, it was meant to depict or to symbolize some belonging to this group. And they did indeed glorify what we call conspicuous consumption, or display conspicuous consumption, which is, typical for hip hop artists, showing sort of the traditional types, showing watts of dollars, or in this case, British pounds, and then sexy women and super fast cars. And yes, this is a construction of masculinity in a very distinct and specific way. It's not dissimilar from other groups from ghettos in inner city anywhere, in Western countries where they are at the margins. And of course, these Albanians were actually in many ways at the margins. So they were immigrant young people, not always with official status, and they could show and tell stories back home. And this is the interesting thing, that these stories were always such stories of success. And sometimes it was true and sometimes it wasn't true, but these communication threads are really interesting, and also what hip hop communicates to back home. But also, interestingly, we had in recent years, of course, particularly in criminology, these raging debates around whether or not hip hop incites violence and can be used as evidence in court. So you have lyrics that are clearly, just full of violent content, misogynist as well, and even announcing, dissing the opponent, announcing battles. And again, that goes beyond the Albanian example, and we have that in examples in many languages, but it does have a US American hip hop, Black American hip hop background. But is that all that there is to hip hop? I wondered. And in the I have to go back to the criminological debate. So basically, in court, in the US, in the UK, we had hip hop lyrics used to essentially criminalize young Black men who engaged in this music genre. And the criminologists opposed that. There was an open letter, it was in 2021, where they vehemently said this can't be used. This is an art form. This is dissing, sort of boasting, and it's street life online, as Elias, I think, is the criminologist said. It's just transferred, into video now, into YouTube. So we have this massive amplification of this this message and this communication, what used to be just localized on the street. Does that equate what's actually happening? There may or may not be links, but we can't just start from the assumption it is a reflection of criminal activities. And the same is true for the Albanians. And I still think we really need to dig deeper. Who are these kids? Who are they really? Nobody has really done ethnographic field work with these Albanian youngsters. There are some big bosses. There are people who have made money from this hip hop. But, interestingly, also hip hop artists who are successful sort of become mainstream. They are then not anymore really the outcast. And the other thing we found is that hip hop lyrics are really complex, and not all hip hop lyric, and I'm referring specifically to Albanian lyrics. We did this huge research with my group of collaborators into the lyrics themselves. We found conscientious lyrics, just as in, other hip hop genres. We found also drill types and violent content. We found the description of sort of the stereotypical story archetypes of the hero's journey, where it is really from poor to wealth, and how that happens, how you overcome obstacles or don't overcome them. We also found an enormous amount of references to mom. So mothers are so important, and missing mother. So, masculinity is constructed in very interesting ways.
The final question I wanted to ask in this program is, what helps? What are the solutions to these problems, both here in the UK and back in Albania?
We have to create better policies for migration, and try and really understand these people's stories, and really give the time to see. Because that's the thing. If somebody's been brainwashed, it's gonna take it's like when you go to rehab. To recover from rehab, it takes time. You don't get recovered with an appointment or two. It's exactly the same thing with migration. It's people that they've had years and years and years of trauma, years and years of listening to the story, years and years of feeling like this is the only way. So to reverse that back, it's gonna take years. It's not just an appointment or two. And it's not just because the moment that you're saying, because like I said, like if somebody is in debt and you don't care about it, you don't listen to their story, you just deport them back, you automatically, you literally kill them. You know, they either end up, you know, like, because that's the thing, what other option do they have? You know, how they gonna pay this money back? You know, what are they going to do? It's a really tricky issue, to be honest. It really is. You know, it's very, very tricky. It's sad. Give people enough time to trust you to tell their stories, because I guarantee you, all these people, they want to share whatever is going on, because it's so much to them. Of course, they would love to be able to just release it all, you know. But of course, because they feel like they cannot trust, and especially if they are pressured and attack on questions that they gonna seem malicious or like not necessarily helpful, then of course these people are not gonna be able to even talk about their stories or whatever that is going on. But when you are able to just listen, accommodate and give enough time to this person to trust you, then you'll get the whole picture and exactly what's going on with this individual stories. I think it's very important to like not just, you know, to like Albanian immigration, but like I think immigration in general has a really big, massive stigma, and like one of the first thing I think that everybody thinks when they hear it's like economical reasons. And I'm not saying that's not it, but that's just a small part of it compared to the whole bigger picture of somebody trying to move from one country to another. You know, it's not, money is just one of the reasons, you know. That's a very small, very, very small part of the bigger picture. And I think it's very important to, be very open-minded to it and just listen to the people's stories and try not to, you know, judge and stigmatize based where somebody migrated from and things like that, because that just I think it's very, I mean, the first thing of course is to be, you know, to have a very open mind, whatever case you have in whoever individual you are trying to help or do their case or whatever. You need to be very open and really listen to their story, pay attention. You know, whoever is there, they need that help. They're not there because they don't need that help. Just the fact that they took the risk, they travel from one country to another without knowing anything whatsoever, you know, of course you are in a place when you do need help. You see what I mean? So obviously it's, I think, very important, because that's the thing. Yes, there is a small number of people who do drugs or sell drugs or whatever, but so is English people who do drugs and sell drugs. You know, it's everybody. That's the thing. You cannot necessarily target, you know, it's like Albanian people because this is what they're known for. Yeah, that's a small number, of course, absolutely, you know, but not everybody. And so many people, to be honest, they end up in that not because they want to, but because they feel like they don't have other choice. And then, in a way or another, they get stuck into it. And then, of course, if you are in debt, you don't have much of a choice, because if a person gave you this money, right, and this person is like, you have to do whatever I tell you because you have to pay me back, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? And of course people have the fear, because that's the thing, when they are illegal, right, and you have this person putting you all this pressure and blackmailing you and whatnot, and you have two options on your end: either do what this person is saying or go to the government and seek for help. But because if you go to the government and seek for help, you are afraid that you're gonna get deported and they're not gonna listen to you. So you feel like both ways you don't have much of an option. You see what I mean?
And of course your family is still in danger.
Exactly.
Whatever
so
you do.
What are you going to do? You're likely to trust someone that you shouldn't trust, but you don't have much of a choice. Then go and seek help to the government because you don't know nothing about it, right? All you know is the stories that you've heard through news, that is like, we deported migrants, we taking migrants off the country, we don't like migrants, blah blah blah. So what are you going to do? You're going to listen to this person that it's actually putting your life in danger because you don't trust the second one because you know nothing about it apart from what you heard on media.
So the problem with the stereotypes of the Albanians is that we overlook these very simple and clear pathways forward and solutions that would apply to any kid in an adverse situation anywhere. And I think the fact that culturally family matters so much is also an asset. It can be when your family falls apart, puts you in a particular vulnerable situation if there's no other social security measures in place in any given context. So this is what we have. And, we can see that clearly if we just strip back from the stereotype.
Thank you for listening to this programme. This has been a production by the Refugee Radio charity with support from the Tackling Serious Organised Crime in Partnership Fund. Refugee Radio is a grassroots organisation supporting vulnerable refugees and asylum seekers in Brighton and Sussex. You can find out more about our community projects and check out some of our previous podcasts on our website, refugeeradio.org.uk.
Welcome to Refugee Radio.